I want to tell you a story with Mrs. Jorgenson. And I'm going to start by going back to some really old footage that I shot about 15 years ago. And you can tell because it's in old format. So let's go back in time first. This is the Jorgenson property located in Saratoga, across from the Saratoga Library. You can see the library on the right, and in the red there is the property lines. It's several acres in Saratoga. What is so interesting about this is that I have a history of this tree. The same woman was born on this property. She was born in 1920. Her great-grandfather bought the property in 1878. This house was built in 1916. So here we have the same tree from this photo, which is 1918. And we can see that it's an extremely large tree back in 1918. Mrs. Jorgenson also informed me that her great-grandfather climbed into a hollow of this tree and started a fire. Had a smudge pot going in there to burn out the decay, the bugs, and all the problems. And then he proceeded to fill it with concrete. The photo here is not very good, but it actually was filled up entirely with concrete back in the late 1800s. Amazingly, the tree survived. Enough growth covered up that big wound to the point of where you can tell there's a scar there, but unless you were privy to the knowledge of the concrete, you would have never known that it was full of cement. I first started working on this tree back in 1982, and I clicked off a photograph of it. And it looked okay back in 1982. It had a nice shape and a nice size. But what's interesting is that the tree looks very similar in size and stature to what it looked like in 1918. And this photograph was taken just a few months ago. So it's gotten a bit bigger in the last 25 years or so, but the tree is still thriving. The foliage is good, it's got a full canopy, but we know there are some internal problems. If you look closely there, you'll see that there is actually an axle of an old Model T embedded in the main crotch up there. There are numerous wounds that have closed over. There's a close-up of that old Model T axle. That must have happened sometime after the late 1800s, because obviously the Model T wasn't invented then. So this leads me to believe that the old farmer, this was just a farmer that owned the property, believed that this tree was structurally unsound, and his thinking process led him to support this tree. Now he knew just how bad it was because he filled it. He put the concrete in there. So he must have been pretty worried about this tree. And sadly, the tree finally succumbed to all these problems. But the topic that I'm talking about here is mostly talking about when a tree is supported artificially by numerous different attachments and cables, and in this case a through rod. We can extend the life of the tree considerably, or we can create a situation that might create an instability and a dependency on all these artificial attachments and artificial supports. On this particular tree, there was only 2 inches of healthy wood around the main crotch area and the main trunk. However, the wood up high was solid through and through, so the weakness in the main support system failed. Now, other than cars driving underneath the tree occasionally, there really isn't any significant target. So it was an easy decision to say, let's just live with the tree until it falls apart. Having worked on this tree as long as I have, I knew that it was a dangerous tree, and actually the last 10 years
I refused to allow any of my guys or myself to climb this tree. We just got up there in a bucket truck. And I warned her repeatedly that it's getting pretty bad. But the evidence was not really obvious. I was trying to look at it and guess at how bad it was on the inside. And there's that axle. You can see that it pulled clean through and bent the cross support. There was actually a piece embedded inside the trunk of the tree. There were also 2 beehives active, one on each Y of the failure. Working around the bees was quite a challenge. I had to get an enclosed cab bobcat to get in here close enough to lift these pieces, but I still had to get in there and do some cutting with a very angry swarm of bees. Fortunately, I did not get stung. Now, we run into situations all the time where there are large oak trees and other varieties of trees that are completely cabled or supported in other ways. Many of these trees are over houses. When you have a tree that is artificially supported, it continues to grow for a long, long time and becomes dependent on these supports. So it's important to ask yourself, if you have a tree that becomes so dependent on a cable system or a support system that it is able to continue to live on even if it becomes very hollow, at what point does this ticking time bomb exceed the limits of the support system that you've added? And what decisions are you going to make about this tree?
So, back to present day. The house is still there. Sadly, Mrs. Jorgenson passed away a few months ago. But her sons still have possession of the property, and they want me to go in there and do some work. So I figured I'm going to have to document this place because it'll likely get torn down and developed, and something's going to happen here that is not going to be too nice because there's so much history in this place. Old Mrs. Jorgenson used to sit on that front porch and watch us work in her older days. Here's the back patio. You can tell how old the property is. There's just really cool stuff. But, I can't tell you how many times she warned us not to bump into this. And sure enough, one time we did. We broke it. And I had to rebuild this little rock structure. She said her father built that. And Mrs. Jorgenson was born in 1920 in this house. So let's go to the present. This is the tree that I was showing you in that older presentation. And sure enough, let's look at the back side of it. If you look up close inside, you can see that it is indeed full of concrete. And that's why the tree was cut off where it was. We ruined a number of chains trying to take this thing down. When it split, it fell apart. So it's going to sit there until it rots away and the concrete can go. But I had some fun walking around and reminiscing. I hadn't been here in a few years. We did get some work. There's some big dead pines. I'll show you in a bit. But I kind of wanted to tell you a little story here. About 20 years ago, I was walking through this orchard, just like I am now, and they had dissed it. And I was walking along. I kicked up a silver dollar. Not that key there, but a silver dollar. I remember it was a 1921 piece dollar. And it was in really good condition. I couldn't believe it. So I took it and pocketed it. And years later, I found out that the son has a cousin that went out there and did some metal detecting and found a whole bunch of silver dollars. Here's a cool tree. This is one of the giant eucalyptus trees that were planted by her father or her grandfather, I'm not sure, long time ago in the 1800s, so they'd have a constant source of firewood supply. Well, there's about 4 or 5 of them left, and over the years they've been taking them down, and I've taken down 4 or 5 of them. Giant trees, and until they enacted the permit requirements, these trees were just deemed firewood trees. Well, they got enormous. They got too big. So I kept walking around the property to see what trees need to come out, and sadly, a bunch of the Monterey pines are dying. I think we've taken out at least a dozen dead pine trees on our property already over the years. There's 3 more, 2 completely dead, 1 almost dead. There's a stump of one of the old pines we cut down. I think I took this one out about 10 years ago. It was kind of interesting. I stepped up on top of it, and I could feel how spongy it was underneath. The reason that we are going to be going there is there's an adjacent playground. There's a field and play area. And 2 of the dead pines are hanging over that property, so there's a liability issue. So the kids are going to end up selling the property, but until then, they've got to deal with the liabilities. So there's one of the big liabilities I was talking about. Yet another stump, and it was interesting. You know, I stomped on them, and maybe you can see there. Look at that. It's crumbling under my feet. Pine trees are interesting. Oftentimes, if a client doesn't really care about where they are, I tell the people that they rot away quickly, and they do. And from time to time, I get a job to grind out an old rotten stump, and they just go like butter. It's so easy. Here's one of the dead ones, and I couldn't help myself. You know, every time I walk this property now, I keep thinking, is there a stash of silver dollars hidden here somewhere? Why did so many of them come up when that cousin was doing his metal detecting? Is there hidden treasure? I wonder how many old coins and how much silver and how much history is hidden in these fields. Because you got to remember, this property has not changed much since 1878. And whatever happened here and is in the ground is still there. Anyway, long story short, we did get the job to take out a bunch of these pines, and some of them are in different stages of decline. One by one, they're all going to go away. As I was starting to say, they're susceptible to a number of problems. And you see the woodpeckers are going after some of the beetles. Yet a few more stumps from past removals. One by one, they're all going away. It's a combination of the pine beetle and the pine pitch canker disease, as well as the western pine beetle. That's a different type of beetle. There's the Ips pine beetle, the western pine beetle, and the sequoia pitch moth, and they all transmit this disease that's taken out the pines. It's kind of sad because this is kind of the last of the old orchard properties, and as soon as they sell it off, it's going to get developed, and it's like there's so little open space left. This is 3 acres right in the heart of Silicon Valley's wealthy district, and some of these trees are amazing. And over the years, we've worked there almost 40 years, and I think I've worked on just about every tree on this property multiple times. Well, sad to see it go. Sorry to see you go, Mrs. Jorgenson. You lived to be 98 years old. We should all be so lucky. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed this rather long-winded story.